couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was collapsing, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me with such force I thought I might pass out. It wasn't just the betrayal. No, it was everything. Every lie, every kiss, every "I love you" that felt like a cruel joke now. My world, the one I'd built around us, around him, crumbled into a pit of lies. I had found out by accident, if you could even call it that. I wasn't snooping. I had never been the kind of wife who doubted her husband, who needed to check his phone or ask where he was going. But this time something had felt off. It had been a small thing, a text notification while his phone sat next to mine on the kitchen counter. I hadn't meant to look, but when I saw a name pop up that I didn't recognize, my stomach turned. "Had a great time last night. When can we do it again?" The words punched me in the gut, sharp and unforgiving. I stood frozen, my brain struggling to process the message. There had to be some mistake. Maybe it was a friend, maybe it was some business meeting that had gone late. My mind clung to excuses like they were life rafts. Anything to stop the growing realization that I was about to drown in a truth I wasn't ready to face. I opened the text thread, my hands trembling so badly I could barely scroll. There were photos of her, of him, of them together, smiling, kissing, touching in ways that used to be only for me. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, my back hitting the cabinets as I gasped for air. I felt like I was dying. Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision, and I couldn't even see the words anymore, but they were seared into my brain. I couldn't unsee them. I couldn't unfeel the jagged edges of betrayal slicing through me. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning in the wake of what I just discovered. My husband, the man I had trusted with my whole heart, had been sleeping with another woman. And from the looks of the messages, it wasn't just once. This wasn't a mistake. It was a full-blown affair. Everything we had built together, everything I thought we were, was a lie. My hands gripped the edge of the counter as I pulled myself up. I felt weak, like my legs couldn't support the weight of my grief, but I forced myself to stand. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to break every single piece of glass in the house to match the way my heart felt. But I couldn't. I had to confront him. I had to hear him say it, had to see him admit what he'd done. My hands were shaking so violently that I nearly dropped his phone as I made my way upstairs. He was in the shower, oblivious to the storm that was about to crash into his perfect little world. I could hear the water running, the soft hum of him singing to himself like everything was fine, like everything wasn't completely and utterly broken. I walked into the bathroom, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the silhouette of his body behind the frosted glass. How many times had I stood in this very spot, watching him with a soft smile, thinking how lucky I was to have him, how blind I had been. "James." My voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, but it was enough. The water shut off and the door to the shower slid open. He stepped out, towel around his waist, his hair dripping wet. He smiled at me, that familiar, comforting smile that used to make my heart skip a beat. Now it just made me sick. "Hey, babe, what's up?" he asked, reaching for another towel to dry his hair. I held up his phone, the screen still lit with her last message. His face fell instantly, the color draining from his cheeks as he realized what I was holding. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of my barely contained fury. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen, his eyes darting between me and the phone. Then he opened his mouth, but nothing came out. No excuses, no explanations, just silence. And that silence was louder than any confession. "How long?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How long have you been seeing her?" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried to find the words. "It's not what you think," he finally muttered. But I could hear the lie before it even left his mouth. "Don't you dare," I spat, my voice shaking. "Don't you dare try to make this seem like anything other than what it is." His face crumpled, and for a brief second, I saw the guilt, the regret. But it wasn't enough. Nothing he could say or do would ever be enough. He had destroyed us. He had destroyed me. I was going to end it, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. End it? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You were going to end it? How noble of you. What was your plan, James? To keep lying to me until you were ready to walk away from your little fling. He flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wanted him to hurt. I wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain that was tearing me apart inside. It didn't mean anything, he said, desperation creeping into his voice now. It was a mistake. I love you, Stop, I screamed, cutting him off. Just stop. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear him try to justify what he had done, to make it sound like it was just some meaningless thing. It wasn't meaningless. It meant everything. It meant that every single promise he had made to me, every vow, every declaration of love was a lie. I turned away from him, unable to stand the sight of his face any longer. I walked out of the bathroom, out of the bedroom, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do next. My world had just shattered into a million pieces, and I had no idea how to put it back together. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, but his voice sounded distant, like he was already fading from my life. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what needed to happen. I don't remember much of what happened after I walked out of that bathroom. It's like my mind shut down, protecting me from the full force of my pain. I know I grabbed my purse, my keys, and my jacket. The next thing I remember is sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I stared out the windshield, but all I could see was his face. His guilty, pathetic face. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't sit in the driveway of the home we had built together, the home that now felt like a graveyard for everything I thought I knew about my life. I needed to get out, to breathe, to run. So I drove. I don't even know where I was going, but the road stretched out in front of me, blurry from my tears, and I just kept driving. The silence in the car was suffocating, but I didn't want to put on the radio. Every song would remind me of him. Every word would twist the knife deeper into my chest. Felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. My sense of time had completely fractured along with my heart. I eventually pulled into the parking lot of a park, one we used to visit together. It was deserted, the late evening sun casting long shadows over the empty benches and pathways. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and just sat there, staring. My mind kept replaying the same scene over and over, the texts, the photos, his face when I confronted him. The way he had tried to lie, tried to soften the blow. But no matter how he tried to spin it, the truth was clear. He had chosen her. Even if he hadn't left me for her yet, even if he said he still loved me, the fact that he could do this meant that he had already made his choice. And it wasn't me. That realization hit me like a wave, crashing over me and pulling me under. I felt like I was drowning, my chest heaving with sobs that I couldn't control. I screamed, my voice ripping through the empty car, but it didn't make me feel any better. It didn't make the pain go away. I don't know how long I sat there, crying and screaming, my body shaking with grief and rage. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, or maybe I just blacked out from the exhaustion. When I finally opened my eyes, the sky had darkened, and the world outside my car was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. I felt numb, empty, like I had cried every tear I had inside me and there was nothing left. My throat was raw, my eyes swollen, but the pain was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. I knew I couldn't stay in that parking lot forever. I couldn't hide from this. I had to go back. I had to figure out what to do next. But the thought of seeing him again, of facing the reality of what had happened, made me feel sick. I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and forced myself to start the car. The drive home felt like a death march. Every mile brought me closer to the wreckage of my life, to the confrontation that I wasn't ready for. But I had no choice. This was my life now. This was the reality I had to face. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was still there. Of course it was. Where else would he go? This was his house too. But for the first time, it didn't feel like it. For the first time, it felt like he was an intruder, like he didn't belong in the life we had built together. I sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering the strength to walk through the front door. My legs felt heavy as I climbed out of the car and made my way to the house. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside, the familiar scent of our home hitting me like a punch to the gut. He was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, looking like a man defeated. When he heard the door, he looked up, his eyes red and swollen, his face pale. I had never seen him look so broken, but instead of feeling sympathy, all I felt was anger. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Does it matter?" I shot back, my voice cold, detached. He flinched at the sharpness of my words but didn't respond. For a moment, the room was filled with a thick, suffocating silence. It felt like we were standing on opposite sides of a canyon, too far apart to ever reach each other again. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "Sorry?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Sorry isn't going to fix this, James. Sorry isn't going to make me forget what you did. Sorry isn't going to undo the fact that you destroyed everything." His face crumpled, but I didn't care. I didn't want to comfort him, to make him feel better about the choices he had made. He didn't deserve that. He didn't deserve my sympathy. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I fucked up. I know I did. But I love you, Emma. I do. It didn't mean anything with her. I made a mistake." "A mistake," I repeated, my voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. A mistake is losing your keys. You didn't make a mistake, James. You made a choice. A choice to betray me, to lie to me, to throw away everything we had." He didn't say anything, just stared at me, his eyes filled with guilt and shame. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered the messages, the photos, the way he had touched her, smiled at her, loved her. "Do you love her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes widened in shock, like he couldn't believe I would even ask that. "No," he said quickly. "No, Emma, it's not like that. I don't love her. I don't even know why it happened." "You don't know why?" I repeated, my anger flaring again. "That's bullshit, James. You knew exactly what you were doing. You don't accidentally end up in someone else's bed. You made a choice, and now you have to live with it." He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "I can't do this," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I can't stay here and pretend like everything is fine. I can't pretend like you didn't destroy me." "Emma, please," he begged, standing up and taking a step toward me. "We can fix this. We can go to therapy, we can work through it. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me." I shook my head, backing away from him. "I don't know if there's anything left to fix." His face fell, and for a moment, I almost wavered. Almost. But then the image of him with her flashed in my mind again, and the pain surged back to the surface. "I need space," I said quietly. "I need time to figure out what I want, what I need. But right now, I can't be around you." "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice small, defeated. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'll figure it out." He looked like he wanted to argue, to beg me to stay, but he didn't. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping as he realized that this was the beginning of the end. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me like a physical force. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing. Was this really it? Was I really walking away from the life we had built together? But then the pain surged again, reminding me of everything he had done, and I knew I couldn't stay. Without another word, I opened the door and walked out. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Pain, anger, confusion. I stayed with my friend Jessica for a while, who welcomed me with open arms. No questions asked. She had always been there for me, but this time I felt like a burden. No matter how much she comforted me, I couldn't escape the gnawing pain inside. I tried to go about my days normally, but nothing was normal anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of him, of us. It was like he was haunting me, even though he was miles away. I hadn't spoken to him since I left, but he had called, texted, begged me to talk to him, to come home. Home. The word didn't even feel real anymore. The house we shared didn't feel like home. It was just a shell, a place filled with broken promises and shattered dreams. I thought about calling him back, about talking things through, but every time I picked up my phone, the memories of his betrayal flooded back, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to face him again. Days stretched into weeks, and the initial shock of what had happened slowly gave way to a dull, aching numbness. At Jessica's, I tried to bury myself in distractions, in anything that would take my mind off James and what he had done. But no matter what I did, the emptiness followed me like a shadow. Jessica was patient, giving me the space I needed while quietly reminding me that she was there, ready to listen when I was ready to talk. I wasn't ready. Not yet. The few friends who knew what had happened texted me now and then, but I couldn't respond to any of them. It felt like there was a chasm between me and the rest of the world, and I didn't have the strength to bridge it. The hardest part was the nights. During the day, I could keep busy, at least pretend to be functioning. I would force myself to get out of bed, shower, eat something, even go for a walk around the block. But when the sun set and the world grew quiet, the pain came crashing back with a force that left me breathless. I'd lie awake in Jessica's spare bedroom, staring at the ceiling as my mind replayed every detail of James's betrayal. I couldn't escape it. It was like my brain was torturing me, forcing me to relive every moment over and over again. The texts, the photos, the image of him with her, smiling, kissing, touching her the way he used to touch me. I wondered if he was still seeing her. The thought made me nauseous, but I couldn't stop it from creeping into my mind. Was she the one he turned to now, while I was alone in a stranger's bed, trying to figure out how my life had unraveled so completely? One night, as I lay in the darkness, the pain too much to bear, I picked up my phone. I knew I shouldn't, knew that looking at his messages would only hurt me more, but I couldn't help myself. There were dozens of texts from him. Apologies, desperate pleas, promises that meant nothing now. Please talk to me. Emma, I'm begging you. Just give me a chance to explain. I love you. I don't know what I was thinking. I'll do anything to make this right. But he couldn't make it right. Nothing could. The person I had loved, the man I thought I knew, was gone. He had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. A stranger who had lied to me, betrayed me, shattered everything we had built together. I turned off my phone and tossed it across the bed, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. I hated that I still felt so much for him. I hated that, despite everything, there was still a part of me that missed him, that wanted him to wrap his arms around me and tell me it was all just a horrible nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real, and I had to accept that. I wiped my tears, sat up, and pulled my knees to my chest. The silence of the room pressed in on me, and I felt the familiar ache of loneliness. It was strange. How you could be surrounded by people and still feel so completely alone. Jessica had tried to get me to talk to a therapist, but I wasn't ready for that either. I didn't want to unpack the pain, to dig into the mess of emotions swirling inside me. It was easier to just keep everything locked up, buried deep where no one could see. But I knew I couldn't do that forever. The pain was already eating away at me, consuming me from the inside out. I had to face it. I had to figure out what I wanted, what I was going to do next. Could I ever forgive James? The question haunted me. Some part of me wanted to believe that we could fix this, that we could rebuild what had been broken. But another part of me, the part that had been shattered by his betrayal, couldn't imagine ever trusting him again. How could I? How could I look him in the eyes and not see her? I lay back down, staring at the ceiling once more, and let my mind drift. Somewhere in the quiet, I thought about who I was before him, before us. I'd built my life around James, around our future together. But now, with that future ripped away, I didn't know who I was anymore. It was a terrifying thought, realizing how much of myself I had lost in him. The days continued to blur together after that, but something shifted in me. Maybe it was the exhaustion of crying. Maybe it was the numbness finally setting in. but I knew I had to stop hiding. I couldn't stay frozen in this limbo forever. One morning, I woke up and decided it was time to face the mess I had been running from. It took me another week to gather the courage to return to our house. I knew I couldn't avoid it forever, and if I was ever going to figure out what came next, I had to face the remnants of my life. Jessica offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. When I pulled into the driveway, a flood of memories hit me all at once. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. It looked the same as it always had, but everything inside had changed. I had changed. The front door creaked as I stepped inside, and for a brief moment, the scent of the house, of us, washed over me, bringing with it the bittersweet pang of familiarity. I had loved this house. I had loved the life we had built inside it. But now it felt foreign, like a place that no longer belonged to me. James wasn't home. He was staying somewhere else, giving me the space I needed, though I wasn't sure if it was out of respect or guilt. Maybe both. Either way, I was grateful. I wasn't ready to see him yet. Not here. Not in the place where everything had come crashing down. I wandered through the rooms, my fingers brushing over the furniture, the picture frames, the small reminders of our life together. There was a photo of us on the mantel, taken just a few months ago at a friend's wedding. We were smiling, looking so in love, so happy. I wondered if he had already started seeing her then. The thought twisted in my gut, but I forced myself to keep moving. Upstairs, in our bedroom, it was worse. Our bed, was still unmade from the last night I had spent there. I stood at the foot of it, staring at the rumpled sheets, the pillows that still smelled like him. How many nights had we shared in this bed? Laughing, talking, making love. How many times had I felt safe in his arms, never once imagining that he was capable of such betrayal. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my hands trembling as I buried my face in my palms. I had come here to find some kind of closure, but instead, all I felt was an overwhelming wave of grief. I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know if I could. After what felt like hours, I finally stood up and went to the closet. I grabbed a suitcase, my hands moving automatically as I started packing. I didn't know where I was going, or how long I'd be gone, but I knew I couldn't stay in this house any longer. Not like this. I packed only what I needed, leaving behind everything that felt too heavy with memories. When I zipped up the suitcase, I took one last look around the room, my heart aching. This was supposed to be our life, our future, but now it was just a ghost of what could have been. I was about to leave when I noticed something tucked under the bed. An envelope, yellowed with age. Curious, I bent down and pulled it out. My name was written on the front in James's handwriting. For a moment I hesitated. Did I really want to know what was inside? But my curiosity won out, and with trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a letter dated years ago, back when we had first gotten married. It was a love letter, one he had written on our honeymoon but never given me. His words were tender, filled with promises of forever, of building a life together, of never hurting me. He had poured his heart into that letter, his hopes, his dreams for our future. And now all of it felt like a lie. I crumpled the letter in my hands, anger boiling up inside me. How dare he write such beautiful words, only to betray them? How dare he promise me forever, only to shatter it? With a sob, I tore the letter in half, letting the pieces fall to the floor like the broken fragments of my heart. I left the house that day feeling more lost than ever. I had come searching for closure, but all I had found was more pain, more questions, and no answers. I didn't know where to go from there, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep clinging to a love that had been destroyed. I needed to find myself again, to figure out who I was without James. The days after leaving the house were a strange mixture of emptiness and reluctant progress. I returned to Jessica's, where she greeted me with open arms but didn't push me to talk. She knew me too well, knew that I needed time to process before I could let anyone else in. That's what real friends do. They wait, even when you're sinking, because they know you'll reach for them when you're ready. I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I threw myself into mundane tasks. Cleaning, organizing, even starting a new hobby. Sketching. It was something I hadn't done in years. A long-abandoned passion from before James came into my life. The act of putting pencil to paper was therapeutic, even though most of my drawings were jagged lines, half-formed images that reflected the chaos inside me. But as I sat in the quiet of Jessica's spare bedroom, sketching meaningless shapes, the thought that haunted me the most wasn't even the betrayal anymore. It was the future. What now? How do you rebuild your life when the foundation has been ripped out from under you? I hadn't reached out to James since that night I left the house. His texts had slowed, though they still trickled in every few days. Each time my phone buzzed, I felt a mixture of dread and curiosity. I never opened them. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face him, to hear whatever excuses or pleas he had. But the part of me that once loved him still lingered in the corners of my mind. It whispered, late at night, that maybe there was something salvageable, that maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe people made mistakes, and maybe love was about forgiveness. I hated that part of me, the part that still cared, still wondered if we could fix this. Because deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive him. Not fully. And without forgiveness, what was left? I was still lost in these thoughts one evening when Jessica came into the room, 2 cups of tea in her hands. She sat down beside me on the bed, handing me a cup without saying a word. We sipped in silence for a while before she finally spoke. "Have you thought about what's next?" she asked gently, her eyes soft with concern. I stared down at the tea, the steam swirling in the dim light. "I don't know," I admitted. "Everything still feels broken." "That's because it is," she said, not sugarcoating it. "But you won't feel like this forever, Emma. You'll figure it out, even if it feels impossible right now." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed her. Felt like I'd never be whole again. Like the person I used to be was buried under the rubble of this betrayal, and no amount of time or healing could bring her back. Jessica placed her hand on mine, squeezing gently. "You don't have to figure it out all at once. Just one step at a time. And maybe talking to someone, professionally, wouldn't be the worst idea." I knew she was right. The pain was too deep, too tangled, for me to sort through on my own. But the thought of laying it all out for a stranger, of revisiting the raw wounds over and over again, felt exhausting. "I'll think about it," I said quietly, and she nodded, understanding that was as much as I could offer right now. We finished our tea in silence, and after she left the room, I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling once more. What's next? It was the question that wouldn't leave me alone, the one that I couldn't answer no matter how hard I tried. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of resolve. Maybe it was Jessica's words finally sinking in, or maybe I was just tired of feeling stuck. But I knew I needed to do something. I couldn't keep floating through each day, trapped in the same cycle of grief and anger. So I picked up my phone and scrolled through the contacts until I found the name of a therapist Jessica had recommended weeks ago. My thumb hovered over the screen, doubt gnawing at me. Did I really want to do this? Did I really want to unpack everything, to face the depths of the pain I'd been avoiding? But something inside me, the part that still wanted to heal, to move forward, pushed me to make the call. It rang twice before a soft voice on the other end picked up. "Dr. Klein's office. How can I help you?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Hi, I'd like to schedule an appointment." Sitting in the therapist's office for the first time felt surreal. The room was warm, decorated with soft colors and cozy chairs that were meant to make you feel at ease. But I was anything but. I had spent so long pushing my feelings down, pretending like I could handle them on my own, that now, faced with the prospect of actually talking about them, I felt exposed. Vulnerable. Dr. Klein was kind, though. She didn't push, didn't pry. She just let me talk when I was ready, and when the words finally came spilling out, they came all at once. I told her everything. About James, the affair, the way my life had fallen apart in an instant. "I don't know who I am without him," I confessed, my voice cracking as tears welled up in my eyes. "I built everything around our relationship. And now that it's gone, I don't know where to start." Dr. Klein nodded, her expression gentle but firm. It's normal to feel that way, Emma. When we invest so much of ourselves in someone else, it can feel like we lose a part of ourselves when that relationship ends. But that part of you is still there. We just need to find it again. Her words struck something deep inside me, something I hadn't allowed myself to think about. Maybe I wasn't completely lost. Maybe the version of me that existed before James, the one who had her own dreams, her own life, was still in there, waiting to be rediscovered. The sessions with Dr. Klein didn't magically fix everything, but they helped me start to unpack the layers of pain, of anger, of confusion that had been weighing me down. Each week, I felt a little lighter, a little more capable of facing the future, even if it was still uncertain. Despite the progress I was making, James was still a constant presence in my life, even if only through the unanswered texts and calls. He wasn't giving up, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Part of me wanted to ignore him forever, to build a wall so high between us that he could never reach me again. But another part of me, the part that remembered the good times, the love we had shared, couldn't help but wonder if there was a way back. Could we ever go back? Could we ever rebuild what had been broken? Or was that just a foolish hope? One night, as I lay in bed scrolling mindlessly through my phone, his name popped up again. Another message. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew it would only pull me back into the spiral of what-ifs. But before I could stop myself, I tapped on it. Emma, I know I've said this a million times, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I don't know how to fix it. But I can't stop thinking about you, about us. Please just talk to me. Let me explain. I stared at the message, my heart racing. The anger that had once flared up at the sight of his words had dulled over time, replaced by something more complicated. I didn't know what to feel anymore. I didn't know if I even wanted to talk to him. But I couldn't avoid him forever. I needed closure one way or another. Whether that meant hearing him out or finally telling him that we were done for good, I had to face him. I had to make a decision. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I typed a single word. Okay. The moment I hit send, my stomach twisted in knots. What had I just agreed to? Was I really ready for this conversation? But it was too late to take it back now. The ball was in motion, and soon, I would have to confront the man who had torn my world apart. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop, a neutral place where I wouldn't feel trapped. The hours leading up to the meeting were agonizing. My mind raced with every possible scenario, what he would say, how I would respond, whether I'd fall apart the moment I saw him. When I finally walked into the coffee shop, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. He was already there, sitting at a table in the corner, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. Seeing him again after all this time was strange. He looked the same messy hair, same tired eyes, but there was something different about him too. He looked smaller, like the weight of what he'd done had crushed something inside him. I approached the table slowly, every step feeling like 1,000 pounds. When he saw me, he stood up, his face lighting up with relief, but I didn't let him hug me. I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I sat down across from him, folding my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't," I replied, my tone colder than I intended. He winced but nodded like he understood. He deserved that. For a few moments, we just sat there in awkward silence, the air between us thick with everything that hadn't been said. Finally, he broke the silence. "I don't know where to start," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "How about you start with why?" I said, my voice steady, though my insides were trembling. "Why did you do it, James?" He looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping. "I wish I could tell you it was some complicated reason, something that made sense. But the truth is, I don't even know. It wasn't about you. It wasn't about us. It was me. I was selfish. I was stupid. I didn't think about the consequences." "You didn't think about me?" I said, my voice cracking for the first time. He looked up, his eyes filled with guilt. "No, I didn't. And I hate myself for that every day. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw the full weight of his regret. It wasn't just an apology. It was deeper than that. But regret wasn't enough. Regret couldn't undo the damage. "I loved you," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "I trusted you, and you threw it all away." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine, but I didn't take it. I wasn't ready for that. "I know I did," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm begging you, Emma, please, just give me one more chance. I'll do anything. Therapy, whatever you want. Just don't walk away from us." I stared at him, my heart breaking all over again. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that the love we had wasn't gone forever. But a part of me knew that things could never go back to the way they were. Too much had happened. Too much had been broken. "I don't know if I can," I whispered. His face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might cry. But he didn't. He just nodded, accepting the reality that had been hanging between us since the moment I found out. "I'll wait for you," he said softly. "For as long as it takes. I'll wait." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I wanted, what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control again. The choice was mine, and that, at least, was something. The conversation with James was a turning point, but not the resolution I had hoped for. It didn't magically fix anything, but it gave me clarity. I needed to figure out who I was without him, without the life we had built. And that meant taking a step back from him, from us. In the weeks that followed, I continued therapy, digging deeper into the parts of myself I had lost along the way. It was hard, messy work, but each session brought me closer to understanding what I truly needed. Not just from a relationship, but from myself. James called a few more times, but I didn't always answer. He was giving me space, respecting the distance I had asked for. And I was grateful for that. But I still didn't know what the future held. Would we get back together? Would I find a way to forgive him? Or was this the end of us, the end of everything we had built? I didn't have those answers yet. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I was okay with not knowing. Because for the first time, I wasn't focused on him. I was focused on me, on healing, on finding the person I had been before the betrayal, before the lies. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important step of all. As more time passed, the fog of grief began to lift, and I started rediscovering pieces of myself I had forgotten even existed. Little things at first, like reading in the park on a sunny afternoon, something I used to love but hadn't done in years. Or going to art galleries alone, soaking in the quiet beauty of the paintings. I signed up for an art class, just a local community thing, nothing serious, but it was something I did for me. Something that had nothing to do with James or our old life. I hadn't realized how much of my identity had become wrapped up in being his wife, his partner. Now, I was learning how to be just me. There were still hard days, of course. Days where the pain hit out of nowhere, where the memories of our life together felt too overwhelming to bear. But those days were becoming fewer and farther between. And slowly, I started to imagine a future that didn't revolve around what had happened. A future that wasn't defined by his betrayal. For the first time in months, I began to feel hopeful again. Eventually, I knew I couldn't avoid making a decision about James forever. The weight of that choice hung over me, but I wasn't rushing it. I needed to be sure that whatever path I chose was the right one for me, not just a reaction to the pain he had caused. I continued therapy, continued rebuilding my life, and as I did, the answer started to become clearer. Could I forgive him? Maybe. But the bigger question was, did I want to? Could I see a future where I wasn't constantly haunted by the memory of his betrayal? Could I trust him again? And as I thought about those questions, I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't the same as reconciliation. I could forgive him, in time, for the sake of my own healing. But that didn't mean I had to go back to him. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't want to. I didn't want to go back to a relationship where trust had been shattered. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if he would hurt me again. I didn't want to rebuild something that had been so thoroughly destroyed. I wanted to move forward. On my own. The final conversation with James was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also one of the most freeing. We met at the same coffee shop where we had spoken weeks before, but this time, there was no tension, no uncertainty. I knew what I needed to say. I've thought about it a lot. I began, my hands steady on the table in front of me. And I've come to a decision. He looked at me, hope flickering in his eyes, but I shook my head gently. I can't do this, James. I can't go back. Too much has happened, and I need to move on. His face fell, the weight of my words sinking in. For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but then he nodded slowly. I understand, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I forgive you, I said, and I meant it, but I can't be with you anymore. He didn't try to convince me to change my mind. Maybe he had known this was coming all along. Maybe he had been preparing himself for this outcome. We said our goodbyes quietly, without drama or anger, just two people letting go of a life they had once shared. As I walked out of the coffee shop that day, I felt a strange sense of peace. The pain wasn't gone. It never would be completely, but I was no longer held captive by it. I was free to move forward, to build a new life, one that wasn't defined by betrayal or heartbreak. And that, in the end, was the most important thing. Months later, as the seasons changed and the air grew warmer, I found myself standing at the edge of something new. I had started painting again, had even put some of my work into a local gallery. It was small, nothing grand, but it felt like a piece of myself had been restored. Life wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, still flashes of the past that crept up on me when I least expected it. But I was stronger now. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of what James had destroyed, and I was learning to trust myself again. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. I wasn't the same person I had been before the affair. I had been broken, yes, but I had also been remade. And as I stood in the quiet of my new apartment, surrounded by the life I had begun to create for myself, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. No, more than okay. I was going to thrive. Because in the end, it wasn't about finding closure with James. It was about finding myself. And that journey, I knew, was just beginning. Months passed, and with them came a sense of finality that I hadn't expected but welcomed. It wasn't a dramatic realization or a sudden epiphany, but rather a slow, gentle acceptance. I had let go of the life I had once planned with James, and with that, I had also let go of the pain that had defined me for so long. I saw him once more by chance at a grocery store. Our eyes met briefly across the aisles, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. He looked different, older, perhaps a little more worn, but not in the way that made me pity him. He had changed just as I had. I felt a pang of something, nostalgia, maybe, but it wasn't painful. It was just a quiet acknowledgement of what we had once been. He gave me a small nod, a soft, almost imperceptible smile, and I returned it. There were no words exchanged, no lingering looks, just a mutual understanding that we had both moved on. That night, I thought about him for the first time in weeks, but the sadness that had once accompanied those thoughts was gone. In its place was a sense of peace. I didn't hate him. I didn't even resent him anymore. I had forgiven him, and in doing so, I had freed myself. I went home, lit a candle in my small living room, and sat on the couch with a book. My apartment wasn't large or particularly luxurious, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, every little trinket I had collected was a reflection of who I was now, not who I had been with James. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't haunted by what had happened. I wasn't defined by it anymore. It was simply a part of my story. An important one, yes, but just one chapter in a much longer, much richer book. As I sat there, the soft glow of the candle flickering in the corner of the room, I smiled to myself. I thought about the journey I had been on, the woman I had become, and I felt proud. Proud that I hadn't let the betrayal destroy me. Proud that I had chosen to heal in my own way, in my own time. There was a quiet strength in that, a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. James had once been the center of my universe, but now, I was the center of my own. And that, I realized, was what mattered most. Not the relationship, not the betrayal, but the person I had become in the aftermath. Life went on. New opportunities arose. New people entered my world, and I embraced them with an open heart. There was love in my future, I was sure of it, but this time it would be different. It would be built on the foundation of who I had discovered I was, not who I thought I needed to be for someone else. And as I turned out the light that night and lay in the quiet stillness of my apartment, I felt whole. For the first time in a long time, I was no longer searching for closure. I had found it within myself, and that was enough.